its ravaging addictive properties are only surpassed by one other synthetic analgesic, methadone, now ironically used in the treatment of heroin addicts to block their heroin cravings. Law enforcement agencies suggest there may be as many as 500,000 heroin addicts nationwide. Many are trapped within this country's core and inner cities, but growing numbers of others are currently being identified among the middle and upper income classes, especially among white youth. To gauge the drug's appeal, we asked a self-confirmed heroin addict to show us how one did some big boy, and more importantly, to tell us why.
When I began to use heroin, I was about 16 or 17. To explain why I started using heroin at that particular point has to do with what goes on usually in the time of life of a person when they are exploring, trying to find out who it is that they are, what it is that they're going to do, who's going to be a role model for them, what they're going to look like, what they're going to come out to be eventually. I was also seeing people down on the corner drinking wine, nodding out. I was seeing people have problems with one another, knowing that people kill one another, knowing that we were having a difficult time as human beings. Heroin seems to set up specific conditions within this head that says I'm out. Produces a condition within me, most marked physical detachment from the usual state of consciousness. In other words, it's the thing that allows me to feel most different about this body, how things around me are affecting me, the nervous effect that it has on me. It's almost as though the situations around me become vicarious, and I can maintain a specific detachment. To look at people who use drugs, to look at the stereotypes, to look at what people generally know about people who use drugs, and talk about it being a grotesque situation, about things being ugly, about things being very sad, very desperate. All those things are there, but all those things are still very human. You know, to walk down Fifth Park or Madison Avenue and to see a specific sort of environment and see all the people buffed up and looking pretty and not worrying about how they're going to eat or how they're going to get over or whatever. That world exists 20 minutes from Harlem, where there's a lot of garbage on the streets, where there's, you know, kids playing in the streets that have a lot of broken glass and bottles. We're all in this together, you know. There's a pile of shit that I'm looking at on a nice clean street, but that pile is still there and that pile still stinks. Heroin is a way of dealing with the fact that those inequities exist.
If you've got money, you can buy heroin. There's no shortage of heroin in Harlem. I might add that you don't see 600 or 700 people standing on.
Sterling Johnson is New York Special Prosecutor. His jurisdiction, narcotics law enforcement.
Inside, they're in abandoned buildings, they're in bars, they're in apartments, but you can get heroin as easy as you can get a package of cigarettes.
With public television, we're making a film about narcotics in New York City. You know anything about that?
Yeah, I'm afraid about that. Yeah.
Are you involved in that?
Yeah, I'm involved in it.
To what extent? How are you involved in that?
Well, I don't really want to get into that. You have to talk to my about that. I don't want to get into that. Cannot get into that.
Are you doing a film about drugs?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So you just go around and ask informal questions. Like you asked this kid, why did he use drugs?
Yeah, right.
Well, why don't you find out where he got them from?
Where do you think he got some from?
They came from Asia somewhere, right?
How did they get here?
Huh?
How did they get right here?
Now, that's what you find out.
Well, I'm trying to.
You don't ask no kid nothing like that.
Do you know?
You don't ask no kid like
But
that.
do you know?
Hey, listen. I'm older than you, so you don't ask me no questions. Just present yourself right. Police department back out here on the street.
What do you mean? For nothing. But what do you mean?
They got all of that drugs out of downtown and put it back in the street.
For nothing. They just...
What do you mean, why did they use it? Find out why the police put it back in the street. Ask these kids why they
Listen,
use
this guy is saying that the police are putting drugs out on the
They did put
street.
it back out here. Everybody know it. Don't ask these kids why did they use drugs. Why did the police put it back out here?
What do you mean they put it back out?
They did. It was down there. No. Don't tell me you don't know. I'm speaking for myself, man.
What about the police? Do they have any?
I'm telling you now. I'm on the public officials. They got their hand in it, or it couldn't happen out here. Right? I don't mean like to speak up.
Why don't you, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is naive or something, but why don't you come together and make that
Now, you think that people like us out here coming together could make a change? Let's be realistic about it now. Do you think people like us could have anything to do with any kind of change out here?
It was clear to us on FYI that drug addicts and an illicit heroin business was clearly evident on major Harlem thoroughfares. We wanted to know what the police were doing about it all, so we paid a visit to police headquarters.
Precinct commanders do not like their uniformed officers to make low-level narcotics arrests when we're talking about a couple of joints of marijuana or some pills, because that police officer is then lost for the rest of his tour of duty, and he goes into an overtime phase when he has to take the prisoner to criminal court, where those cases are just not seriously treated by the courts, given the volume of other cases that they have. What we try to do is use our narcotics officers, who are specially trained to address these conditions, so that periodically you may see a uniformed officer ignoring what appears to be a low-level narcotics transaction. Part of the problem is that police officer has got to obey the rules of evidence. He's got to make an arrest where he can stand up in court and take the oath and swear that he had probable cause to believe that a narcotics transaction was going down. I think that we have made a dent in Harlem. For example, Operation Drug, which was put into place some 2 years ago in the 2-8 and the 3-2 precinct in Harlem, has made a substantial impact on street conditions up there. Now, it's never going to be perfect. New York City is never going to be perfect. What we have to do is do our best, consistent with the manpower we have. But we've made thousands of street arrests up there, and we've confiscated millions of dollars worth of contraband, narcotics and guns and other things. And we've seen a reduction in the amount of street crime in those two precincts in the last 2 years. But we've put a substantial amount of manpower in that.
You got to clean it up, man. I'm breaking it up. You got to clean it up. I'm breaking it up. Hold up, man. Hold up, Mike. You might clean it up, man. What channel is that? Hold up, Mike. Hey, man, take it up. Let it go on us. Let's go.
About 7 barber shops in between here and 116th Street, and it's just 2 now. They all closed up because of the junkies robbing us and knocking us off, you know.
How often have you been robbed?
Well, there was a time when I was robbed like every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, until I finally took everything out of here. There was nothing here left. We even come here just to get the telephone. There was nothing else in here but the telephone.
Are you personally afraid?
I'm not really afraid because I know a lot of them. I've been here so long. A lot of the folks that's doing these things, I gave some of them their first haircut. And they know me, and they hardly bother me directly, you know.
Many community leaders in Harlem are soured by what they interpret as the official line. Reverend Calvin Butts is pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church. What kind of rationale do law enforcement officials give you when you see that they're not doing as much as you think they could do?
Well, they seem to feel that they're doing all that they can do. Especially when you talk to the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration under the Department of Justice. Much of their effort, as far as I can understand, has been geared toward this country's relationship to other nations where a large part of the heroin traffic comes from. It's imported from Turkey or from Mexico. And they seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on putting their agents in these places, trying to break it there. But we haven't seen the results of it here, especially in the Harlem community, which is seen, I guess, and rightly so, as the drug capital of America. And here's something else that's very interesting. Now, I got this from our police commissioner here in the city of New York, and also from the Drug Enforcement Administration. An interesting statistic. I was told, and not only myself, but a group of concerned clergy from this community, a number of us, that if the Drug Enforcement Administration, or even, shall we say, the city of New York, had all the men that they needed in their various units, and all of the money that they needed to pay these men and to fund investigative kinds of procedures, that only 20% of drug traffic that comes into this city could be stopped. Now, what kind of thing is that to say? Or what does it say? It says that enforcement is just about powerless to do anything about the enormous drug problem that we have in this city.
Before Nelson Rockefeller left office as governor of New York State, he got the state legislature to pass drug abuse legislation that was the most draconian in America. Rockefeller's drug laws guaranteed mandatory long-term sentencing and eliminated plea bargaining. These tough measures were necessary, said the governor, to stamp out drug addiction forever. Today, critics of the legislation say the laws have proved to be a failure. Jeremiah McKenna is the general counsel for New York State Select Committee on Crime.
Before the Rockefeller drug laws, we had much tougher laws in New York State. Between 1960 and 1970, we increased the penalties for narcotics trafficking 3 times to the point where you could get a 20-year sentence for selling an ounce or more of a hard drug. The problem was the law was never being enforced. Everybody just plea bargained out from under those penalties. All that the Rockefeller drug law really did was say, no plea bargaining out. I mean, we did not, in fact, we lowered the penalty structure in the narcotics laws. And what we did was we made it binding on law enforcement that they enforce the law. That became the toughest drug law. And that's the irony of the Rockefeller drug law. Law enforcement could not live with a structure that made them do what the law said they were supposed to do.
One way adult drug dealers have avoided Rockefeller's tough drug laws is by turning over the street-selling side of the heroin business to juveniles under 18, who may not be liable to the long-term sentences meted out to adult narcotics offenders. We talked to a former juvenile drug dealer, preferring to remain unidentified. He granted us an interview in a midtown hotel.
How young are some of the people that we're talking about? 13, 14, 15. Just keep going. At that age? Some is, about 11, you can say the youngest, maybe. Basically 13, 14, junior high school.
Junior high school kids are dealing drugs. What can a kid in that business earn, say, a week or a year?
Oh, it depends, man. They can earn from, the less they earn is like $300 a day. They sell narcotics. So $300 a day is more than their parents make a week.
Do they ever think about what happens to the people that they're selling junk to?
Not at all.
Why not?
Why should they think about it? It's not really the people from out the neighborhood. People from other neighborhoods. Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, wherever.
Come there.
Come to any spot that's got the best drug.
Critics of narcotics law enforcement policies find it difficult not to believe that despite the voting power blacks so clearly evidenced to elect President Carter, these same blacks are now being written off as casualties in the decline of the great American cities. And, apart from increased federal assistance in drug abuse law enforcement, most recommendations we were given seemed hardly fulfilling.
If you're talking about the enforcement effort against the drug problem, against those who sell it, those who import it, those who profit by it, we've lost that. That's out. Simplistically, to legalize the use of heroin under controlled circumstances, similar to that they've used in England, probably based on our own experience and our own type of population, and to use this to cut the underpinnings from this tremendous illegal population, illegal business that's dealing with this. You take the profit out of this. When you take the profit out of this, also you take the desirability out of this.
I think then you're writing off a generation when you allow free distribution of heroin. It has not worked in any country it's been tried in, as far as I know. And it seems to be the route we always go. When we can't enforce the law against them, we then give them the market by legalizing, and that's not the answer.
We ought to put more political pressure via our State Department on those nations where we know large quantities of drugs are coming from. That's number one. Number two, I think that the federal government ought to take a more active role in enforcement on local and state levels in terms of making sure that those agencies really harass, move out, do whatever is necessary, short of the erosion of civil rights, to push drug trafficking out of our country altogether.
I think it's a cop-out. They've already agreed that they can't handle the problem. It's racist in some nature, where people just believe that drug addiction is confined to the black and brown communities, and we know that this epidemic has spread even outside of the economic status of the poor and going into the middle class and the wealthy as it relates to cocaine. Where do you cut it off if you want to make it legal? I'll show you what can happen if you do make it legal. What age is it that we should be legally allowed to dispense drugs to an 18-year-old, 16, 15-year-old addict? Or more importantly, when you come from a high unemployment area, where you find deteriorating houses, where you find really a lack of hope, and the older brother is coping with his problems, going to the local Fed center to get his high. How does he explain this to his younger brothers and sisters that want out just as badly? And so I assume the proponents would say, well, you have to be addicted in order to get it. We're not going to create addicts. So what's the big deal about going into the street, into the illicit market, and getting addicted, saying, now I'm ready for my federal take? No, it seems to me that if we're prepared to give up on people, it's just like if we have malnutrition, you say, well, don't give them anything, just leave it alone, the problem would go away. No, it's going to spread, and it's going to spread the same way that methadone has spread.
This grim view of drug enforcement in New York City is shared by some federal officials who are calling the war against narcotics America's new Vietnam, a no-win struggle that pits thousands of federal agents armed with the latest in secret technology against a sophisticated guerrilla drug trade.
And despite a few well-publicized arrests, law enforcement has lost the heroin war in Harlem. The border war to intercept the flow of heroin isn't doing much better, it seems. Drug enforcement officials are now getting bogged down pursuing their lowest priority, marijuana. These are captured enemy vessels, battered South American fishing trawlers, and these are the prisoners of the drug war. Colombian sailors paid well by their standards to haul dope to the American drug market. This is what the drug war is all about. Rich Colombian marijuana. It makes some of the best reefers money can buy. These particular vessels, the Santa Magdalena and the Miss Carroll, were seized by the United States Coast Guard in late October after they appeared to be drifting aimlessly off the Florida coast.
She was up in position outside of normal shipping lane. She was 70 miles east of West Palm, heading in a westerly direction toward the U.S. They stated they were bound from Venezuela to Mexico. I am not sure exactly why they were 70 miles east of West Palm, but other than that, that's the only explanation I had.
A Coast Guard boarding party found what it suspected it would find: Colombian marijuana, tons of it, packed in cardboard television boxes. This successful bust netted nearly 40 tons of contraband and showed how well the half-dozen federal agencies thrown into the drug war have learned to cooperate. For example, in this case, the Coast Guard spotted the vessels, the State Department got approval from Venezuela to board them, the U.S. Customs Service took possession of the ships and the marijuana, most of which is burned in state incinerators. The Immigration and Naturalization Service took the crew into custody, and the Drug Enforcement Administration interrogated the crew and searched the vessel for evidence for its investigative files. Although this multi-agency battle plan regularly proves successful in the skirmishes, the net result shows the government is really losing the war.
Have you run into any of these people before? Are they repeaters in any way?
There's a couple of them that look mighty familiar.
In fact, 7 of the 9 crewmen of the Santa Magdalena had been apprehended the month before in a similar smuggling attempt. Some of the crew were on their 3rd mission, and because they're not U.S. citizens, they'll merely be sent home at taxpayers' expense. A one-way plane ride to Colombia costs $192. Federal agents say they expect to see them again in this lucrative revolving door drug trade. Federal and local agents simply cannot stop the drug flow in the Southeast, where the dollar volume of drug smuggling has exceeded tourism as Florida's biggest industry. A congressional committee has even sought to have South Florida declared a disaster area because it is now inundated with 80% of the nation's marijuana traffic and 50% of the cocaine traffic. The U.S. Customs Service and the Coast Guard monitor 1,200 miles of accessible coast and 5,000 miles of navigable waters in their search for drugs. Ed Lowry, a helicopter pilot for the Customs Service, says the drug war is as futile as Prohibition was 45 years ago.
This is thoroughly typical of simply literally hundreds of points where contraband can enter. The water is fairly deep. It has access to motor vehicles. It has in fact been used for this particular thing many, many times. I've all personal experience know of some 20 or 30 tons come in this particular area right here. Very, very popular area. Seems to remain so with the volumes. As you see, it has beautiful access to heavy vehicles. Boats can be put in the water in this particular area. Everything that a smuggler could ask for. How can you possibly guard a coast that's so thoroughly open?
Another battlefront is the desert border from El Paso to San Diego. It stretches for 700 miles with nothing but a few strands of barbed wire and some fence posts separating the two countries. Footprints and tire tracks in the drifting sand are the only evidence the smugglers leave. Just outside of El Paso to the southeast, only the dry Rio Grande riverbed and an irrigation canal separate Texas and Mexico. Illegal aliens, still referred to here as wetbacks, hardly get their feet damp crossing this open, unfortified border. Hundreds of aliens cross into the United States each day. 36 million people and 12.5 million cars came through El Paso ports of entry last year. Countless more cross between these legal points to work or shop. Smugglers bring untold amounts of contraband drugs across this border daily. This year alone, agents were able to seize 5 tons of marijuana, 12 pounds of cocaine, and 24 pounds of heroin. The contraband drugs are brought in by mules, people hired by drug dealers to shuttle drugs across the border. Hank Washington is the special agent in charge of the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration's El Paso office. A narcotics agent for more than 20 years, Washington says the situation is hopeless.
They can cross just about anywhere they want to. We don't have enough manpower, even if you had 10,000 men, I don't think, and lined up along the river, I don't think you could stop it. They'll hire somebody to carry it across. They'll either body pack it in a vehicle. They'll walk across the river with it. They'll put it in a spare tire of a vehicle. So many places, so many ways they can do it. Our indication is that most of it comes right through that bridge there. That's the hard narcotics, the heroin and the cocaine. That's what we are finding. Have you seen the bridge, have you? You seen the traffic there? If you take a look at it, as you'll see, it's an impossibility. You can't search everybody. You'd have traffic stacked up for 15 miles, and you just can't do it.
The war room for the nation's battle against drugs is here in an unmarked building near an industrial park in El Paso. It's called the El Paso Intelligence Center. The acronym is EPIC.
I have a positive code 112.
Representatives of 6 federal agencies, the Coast Guard, the Customs Service, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the Federal Aviation Administration, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms cooperate in a venture to store and retrieve information on the people, planes, boats, and automobiles involved in the nation's drug traffic. EPIC houses the top-secret computers and communications equipment the various federal agencies have assembled in their multifaceted battle plan.
Epic, this is center field. Request records check on the following vessel. The vessel is named Black Coral, 150-foot freighter. Black hull, white.
Usually an agent calls in querying for information, and our response time is usually about 20 minutes. The information that he requests then obviously is added into our database to be made available to somebody else who calls. What we call a hit is on a query. Usually 30% of the time we are able to tell the querying officer something about the individual vessel, aircraft that he wants to know.
Be advised, vessel is armed and dangerous. I repeat, armed and dangerous.
20 minutes retrieval time may not be long if you're staked out in an automobile or trailing a ship, but customs pilots who intercept most of the small plane drug traffic need to make an instantaneous identification, since experienced smuggler pilots have learned how to quickly fade from view. The air war waged primarily by customs pilots is conducted with the same daring and camaraderie that characterized the World War I flying aces.
After they're identified, we realize it's somebody we want to stay with, and we'd stay in his blind spot. Off to the side and shortly to the rear, sort of a military formation spot.
This kind of surveillance is usually done at night, with both smuggler and narcotics enforcement officer flying without lights. The glow of the smuggler's tailpipes is the customs pilot's only guide. Computers in the United States Customs Service are always online. In a little interagency rivalry, customs people told us their own computer is better than EPIC's. The names of United States citizens and foreign visitors entering the country are typed immediately into the customs data bank. If a name is flagged, inspectors may make a more thorough search of baggage and ask more questions. They also rely on intuition.
It's more or less a sixth sense whether you really want to go into the luggage that deeply or whether you believe the person or not. I'm really getting a feel of the passenger because I'm looking at his actions or reactions to, what bag I touch. I'm asking him questions all the time to see what his responses are, and that's where I get my feel. That's where the sixth sense comes from.
And a couple of bags of white powder always create a stir.
Oh, we might have something here, gentlemen.
Even if it's only powdered milk.
If this was anything, this would have turned blue.
It's not anything, so we're going to return it back to the passenger.
Customs officials in Miami say most of the people they apprehend are novices or small-time marijuana or cocaine traffickers. They told us the professionals were still using the large numbers of international travelers as a screen to sneak through. The stepped-up cocaine trade provides other headaches for customs. The drug is so compact it can be hidden away on freighters, later to be picked up by small boats or carried ashore by crewmen going on liberty. Cocaine has also been mixed with a plaster of Paris substance and molded into pottery. Upon delivery, the cocaine in the pottery is reduced to powder form. Cargo shipments are tested randomly, but again, the sheer volume of imports dictates that most of the contraband just passes through. The trophies of yachts and airplanes seized by customs attest to the fact that smugglers spare no expense to transport their contraband. Customs officials say their greatest frustration is dealing with the sophisticated equipment the smugglers acquire. Even a rusty old tub like the Santa Magdalena had the best radar and radio equipment, while customs officials say it takes an act of Congress for them to buy a new airplane. Thus, customs often appropriate some of the better seized vessels for its own use. Customs and the Coast Guard maintain a visible frontline surveillance in the drug conflict. The Drug Enforcement Administration performs much of its field work undercover. In 1977, the agency spent nearly $5 million for clandestine drug purchases. The DEA arranged for us to film what they call a flash.
This is a flash film consisting of about $70,000. This is very typical in a narcotics transaction, whether it be done by the government or by just crooks by themselves. Usually they want to see money before they produce their narcotics. A little while ago, this was shown to a crook here in the city, and the transaction is pending in the near future. He was selling marijuana. I'm negotiating for half a ton. He just didn't count. He just looked in the bag and he closed it, and he was satisfied that I did have the money to purchase the narcotics he was selling. But I've been doing it for 12 years now. You never really get used to it. You always have butterflies in your stomach to a certain extent. You don't know who the person might be that might draw a gun on you. I've had a few shootouts, but you can never tell when it might happen again.
3 days later, the suspect, a known drug trafficker with a previous record, was arrested with 5 co-defendants. 1,200 pounds of marijuana was seized. Although the job can be aggravating, many of the enforcement officials we spoke to admitted they enjoyed the dangerous game of good guys versus bad guys. And if one is a customs patrol officer, one could get paid between $18,000 and $26,000 a year to spend one's days and nights on a boat or an airplane.
You enjoy doing this? Certainly. It's a lot more fun than flying for the airlines.
Do you like your work? If I didn't, I must be a fool. I've been here long enough.
What about your job makes you angry?
Everything. No sentences of drug pushers. Small sentences, drug pushers. U.S. attorneys don't have enough people to prosecute. We have a tendency to do the plea bargain, which is a perfectly legal and a perfectly accepted thing. Sometimes we don't like it, but it's a necessary thing. They have to do it. I don't like all the paperwork we're burdened with. Any agent will tell you that. That's the first thing he'll tell you. There's a lot of things about this job that's frustrating. It's a very, very good job.
You wouldn't trade it?
Negative. Never. Sure wouldn't.
The war against drugs is mostly a war against marijuana. 7 out of every 10 drug arrests are for pot, the overwhelming majority for simple possession.
The government says that 36 million Americans have smoked marijuana, and 10 states have decriminalized reefer to some extent. But law enforcement agents busted more people than ever last year, 450,000 of them.
Neither the FBI nor the DEA could tell us how much money it costs to bust marijuana users. But official studies in California and Illinois project that it's about $600 million a year.
This is marijuana, the weed that all the fuss is about. Marijuana has been around for a long time. For thousands of years, writers have praised its medicinal values and condemned its power to disorient the mind. But for the most part, people have cultivated marijuana for the hemp fiber in its stalks and the oil in its seeds. During the 19th century, American doctors prescribed a tincture of marijuana for a variety of ailments, for corns, bronchitis, relief from the pangs of childbirth, and acute depression. The use of marijuana for medicinal purposes effectively ended in 1937. And in 1970, the U.S. government ranked marijuana with heroin as a drug that has no acceptable medical use. After 2 decades of widespread recreational use, today researchers once again are testing its medicinal values. The 5 acres of marijuana growing behind this fence in Mississippi are the property of the U.S. government. To get this legal marijuana, researchers have to plow through the bureaucracies of 3 federal agencies. And once they get it, the researchers have to maintain elaborate security precautions in order to keep it. This is a U.S. government marijuana cigarette. The man smoking it is unique. Bob Randall smokes 70 U.S. government joints a week. He's smoking one of them now. The story of how Bob Randall came to get the government marijuana goes back to 1973. Randall, a glaucoma victim, accidentally discovered that marijuana helped relieve the symptoms of his glaucoma.
For instance, I would look at a street light, and around it would be this tricolored halo, very much like in a religious painting. That occurred one evening in the fall of 1973. I happened to have marijuana at the time. I smoked 2 joints, and within 45 minutes the halos were gone. It was an immediate, overwhelming impression that marijuana had reduced the pressure in my eye significantly.
Randall began to smoke marijuana regularly and illegally. He grew the marijuana out here on the sun deck of his Washington home until the summer of 1975.
I was arrested in August of 1975 out here on this sun deck. I had 4 marijuana plants which I was growing. I wasn't actually home at the time, so the plants were arrested and the police left a search warrant on my kitchen table. I was actually arrested 3 or 4 days later when I was taken, fingerprinted, mugged, and arraigned. I was found not guilty by reason of medical necessity. The judge ruled that my use of marijuana was reasonable and the laws preventing me from using marijuana were irrational.
After the trial, the government found Randall a university research project that provided him with marijuana. But when the project ended in January of 1978, his supply of legal marijuana was cut off.
In an attempt to regain access to marijuana through the federal government, I secured counsel. My lawyers attempted on a number of occasions to privately go to the government and seek a solution. The government was, in essence, stonewalling it. A number of people within the federal government suggested that I go out on the street and meet my medical needs. I'm not sure that that's very wise advice for a person who needs medical help. Just go out on the streets and get your medical help. Certainly you wouldn't ask somebody who had a cardiac condition to go out in the streets and get their medicine on the streets. Certainly you wouldn't ask a diabetic to go out and get his insulin off the streets. There are things about the streets that are dangerous.
Randall filed suit against the U.S. government. The Justice Department settled out of court. Today, the government supplies Randall with marijuana through a written order from his private doctor.
I like that.
He gets it free. In the streets, the same amount of marijuana would cost him about $100 a week.
A few people ahead of you, so it'll be about 5 minutes or so.
The marijuana is supplied to me as any other drug would be supplied to me. I go to my doctor's. He takes out his prescription pad. He fills out a prescription for marijuana. I take it to a government pharmacy here in Washington, and I'm supplied with it once a week.
Mr. Randall? Okay, 70. And we'll see you in 1 week.
Sounds good.
Have a good day.
Okay, thank you. I think the sad thing is that after 2 years, I am the only one who's getting it legally. A lot of people are being forced to get it illegally, and other people are just doing without. There are a lot of people who have glaucoma who could be helped. There are a lot of people who have cancer undergoing chemotherapy who could obviously benefit.
Claims about the medical value of marijuana are increasing. Some of the most dramatic testimonials come from cancer victims, like Harriet Gluck, who lives on Long Island.
I'm 63. I spent 42 years of my life in the New York City school system. I look forward to retirement eagerly. In May of 76, a very routine checkup visit to a dermatologist for my husband, who had had a skin growth removed. I turned to the doctor and said, take a look at this mole on my leg. It looks very peculiar. And he said, do you have a surgeon? And then it was like the whole world collapsed on me.
The surgeon diagnosed cancer, but despite 2 operations, Harriet Gluck's cancer spread. Her doctors recommended chemotherapy treatments.
The first session was in the hospital, and these 2 angels of mercy came in with this long hypodermic needle, and the next thing I knew, I was in for a vomiting session that lasted about 8 hours. It's, frankly, while going through some of this, I would say to the children, I'm never going back again. I would rather die than go for another injection. The experience was an excruciating one.
There had been a few articles in Newsday, which is the paper in this area, and both the family had read them and some friends.
Mrs. Gluck's children read that marijuana might help their mother. They decided to find some for her through friends.
From that point on, we knew we had to try something, and since it seemed to be working in some cases, we knew we had to do it.
That was all he would tell me.
But when Mrs. Gluck asked her cancer specialist about marijuana, he was evasive.
Well, I was a little bit upset at the time because I truly felt that if the doctors knew of the so many patients who were using the marijuana and they knew it had a beneficial effect, they ought to be in a position where they could pass this information along. The idea of having to stumble in the dark and seek out my own information, I would feel sorry for a person who didn't have someone like my 3 children to turn to help them out. I would feel totally helpless. I think I would be completely inhibited by the fact that it was illegal, and would not attempt to go through the devious channels. I wouldn't even know what devious channel to go through. I guess I'm a very naive babe in the woods in that respect.
Do you think it ought to be legalized?
For medicinal purposes, absolutely. There's no question in my mind. No question at all. There's no reason why the doctor can't write a prescription and have it dispensed by the pharmacist over the counter just as any other drug is.
Dr. Lester Grinspoon, a psychiatrist on the faculty of Harvard Medical School, explained that conventional anti-nauseants sometimes don't help the chemotherapy patient.
The usual kinds of treatments of nausea and vomiting, for example, compazine, are often just not at all effective, whereas marijuana is very often quite dramatically effective.
Is this still speculative, or do we know enough now to prescribe the use of marijuana in some of these instances?
Well, I think that we know enough about it to prescribe it.
Other doctors have said that to me privately, but very few of them will say that publicly. Why is that?
Well, I think doctors, like everybody else in this country, were so brainwashed about this substance. When I started to do my work on which led to the book Marijuana Reconsidered, I had much of the same view. It took a couple of years of hard work to disabuse myself of some of these views.
Some chemotherapy patients aren't waiting for attitudes and laws to change. Richard Sandel is smoking marijuana illegally to combat the nausea of his chemotherapy treatments. The illegality is especially troubling to Sandel because he's the director of a drug abuse program.
Next time
but conventional anti-nauseants just don't help him.
And although I was taking compazine at the time, that's the time when the 7.5 hours of throwing up, I mean, my body was sore for a week. From that point on, I have smoked marijuana every time I have gotten chemotherapy because it does work. I mean, I know people that I've talked to who have chemotherapy who are sick for a week and can't eat for most of that time. Every time they eat, they'll throw up. I have not had that happen to me at all. And most of that, I think, is because of the marijuana.
In September, Sandel filed suit against the federal government. He wants to get his marijuana legally, just like Bob Randall.
I don't know why this marijuana thing is such a boogeyman. I mean, the side effects of marijuana are a hell of a lot less than the side effects of my chemotherapy, and nobody's hesitating about giving me chemotherapy. So I just don't understand it. People get irrational with marijuana.
Under pressure, the federal government decided to form an interagency committee on new therapies for pain, in part to examine the medical uses of marijuana. Dr. Seymour Perry of the National Institute of Health is the committee chairman. He urges caution.
Well, you realize before a drug can be recommended for, any drug can be recommended for use by the physician, there needs to be good evidence. Good evidence meaning obtained on the basis of a well-designed clinical trials. There have been a large number of studies and anecdotal reports of the value of marijuana or marijuana derivatives in several different conditions. But that sort of evidence is not sufficient to warrant the introduction of a drug into medical practice.
I'm young. I have the capability, at least, of going into the street if the situation gets really serious and the government won't meet my needs. But I have had to watch people in their 60s go blind because they could not gain access to legal stocks and didn't know where to go to get it illegally.
How were you able to obtain the marijuana?
Same way everybody else does, from the street, which is crazy. Really crazy.
I have a very firm conviction that it's being used medicinally, it's being used to help me, it's being used to alleviate my distress. And if the government sees clear to prosecute me as an offender, then I'm willing to make myself a test case.
We talked to experts in the 3 federal agencies that must approve marijuana research projects. Dr. Edward Tokus of the Food and Drug Administration warned that testimonials are no substitute for thorough scientific investigation. Dr. Tokus said marijuana needs a lot more study before it can be used medicinally. Dr. Kars Besteman of the National Institute of Drug Abuse advised against taking any drugs except under a doctor's supervision. And all the federal officials stressed that marijuana is still illegal.
4 states have recently passed laws to facilitate the therapeutic use of marijuana, but laws depend on legal supplies from the United States government, and thus far not a single marijuana cigarette has been made available to any state. With us on FYI is Peter Benzinger, the administrator of the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration. Mr. Benzinger, is there anything that your agency could do to relax the federal restrictions around the medicinal use of marijuana?
Basically, the availability of any controlled substance, and one that is illegal, such as marijuana, is controlled by HEW. And the availability to an individual who has a medical prescription approved by HEW would be determined by that agency.
Would increased medicinal use create any unusual law enforcement problems for you?
I don't think so, under properly controlled regulations. And I think you should know that the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Department of Justice have no problems with medically approved and sanctioned use of substances like marijuana.
How do you respond, Mr. Benzinger, when communities like, people in communities like the ones we saw in Harlem say that enforcement has lost the heroin war?
Well, I think in many respects we've made problems of our own making in our criminal justice system. I'm reminded all too often that we have 2,500 fugitives. Fugitives that have been arrested, indicted by the Drug Enforcement Administration agents. In fact, more fugitives than we have agents, who, because of the vast rewards, choose not to reappear in court and skip. We do have, though, some encouraging signs, and that's the major reduction in the number of overdose deaths from heroin that have reduced from 150 a month 2 years ago to less than 40 a month. Reduction in purity and a reduction in overall quantities in the United States. 2 tons less heroin is in this country now than was the case several years ago.
But when you say that, is that a function of enforcement, or is that not just a function of the weakness in the supply or some other
I think the key rests in stopping narcotics at the source, and the specific reduction in availability is traceable directly to the enforcement program in Mexico, which the government of Mexico has embarked upon and destroyed the opium poppies before they could be harvested and transformed in laboratory process into morphine base and then heroin. The availability of heroin continues to exist, but the national crime statistics are down, the purity is down, the fatalities are down, the injuries are down from 4,000 every 3 months to 2,000. So there is some encouraging signs. And I think we need to also look to the new legislation President Carter approved, which enables our agency to go after the money and to seize the assets of these major criminal organizations, the fruit of the crime. Over the years, we've arrested people and seized drugs with varying degrees of success. Going after the money and seizing the real estate and the businesses and the cash will put a bigger dent on the heroin traffickers in Harlem and other major cities than almost anything else we could do.
Therefore, Mr. Benzinger, in a word and briefly, what's your prognosis?
I think in terms of heroin, we're seeing continued reduction in availability. In terms of the other drug substances, we are not seeing the same severity of punishment cocaine and marijuana still tend to be generally available throughout the United States.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much, Mr. Benzinger. For Chris Koch and Linda Shan, who is on assignment, and for FYI, I'm Tony Batten. See you.
Lord, dear Lord of love, God Almighty, God above, please look down and see my Lord, dear Lord of love, God Almighty, God above, please look down and see my feet.